The Young and the Restless. Spoilers Wednesday, full January 8, 2025. A tense farewell. Claire's dilemma in Genoa City. Claire had always been a survivor. In the whirlwind of Genoa City, she had navigated complex alliances, avoided deadly traps, and balanced precariously on the fine line between right and wrong. But now, her journey in this town seemed to be reaching an abrupt and bittersweet end. Forced to leave Genoa City alongside the enigmatic and dangerous Jordan, Claire found herself at a crossroads where her intellect and instincts were the only tools she could rely on. Claire's reluctant choice. Jordan's offer wasn't a negotiation, it was an ultimatum. Staying in Genoa City meant putting her life, and perhaps others' lives, at risk. Leaving with him guaranteed survival, but came at the cost of abandoning any shred of a future she had envisioned for herself. Claire, as clever as she was cautious, weighed her options carefully. To the outside world, Claire's decision might appear as a betrayal, but she knew better. She had no intention of spiraling into darkness or becoming a villain in the eyes of Victoria and the others. Agreeing to Jordan's terms wasn't about submission, it was about playing the long game, preserving herself for a chance to fight another day. "I'll go with you," Claire finally said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "But don't mistake this for trust, Jordan. I'm doing this because I don't have a choice. That doesn't mean I'm on your side." Jordan's smirk was unreadable, a mix of triumph and calculation. "Smart move, Claire. I knew you'd see reason." Sharon's brush with death. Elsewhere in Genoa City, Sharon's situation was growing more dire by the moment. Still trapped in the grip of Ian Ward's twisted web, she hovered precariously close to death. Her spirit was strong, but her body was weakening, and time was slipping away. Sharon's life had always been a series of trials, but this was unlike anything she had faced before. Bound and isolated, she clung to hope, not for a miraculous escape, but for the belief that anyone, would come for her. The question loomed, who would rise to the occasion? While Nick had always been her protector, her rescuer, this time fate seemed poised to break the pattern. Perhaps a new hero would emerge, someone unexpected but equally driven to save her from the brink. Whether out of love, loyalty, or sheer determination, this person would prove that Sharon's life was worth fighting for. "Hold on, Sharon," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. "You're stronger than this. Someone will come, they have to." Victoria's worries and growing suspicions. Meanwhile, Victoria Newman had her own storm to weather. The weight of her family's legacy and the uncertainties of the future pressed heavily on her shoulders. While her father, Victor, had taught her the importance of control and strategy, the situation with Claire and Cole had left her feeling uncharacteristically vulnerable. Something was off. Claire's demeanor had shifted in subtle but unmistakable ways. And Cole, usually so transparent in his ambitions, had grown secretive. The two seemed to share a quiet understanding, a bond forged in whispers and exchanged glances. "What are they planning?" Victoria muttered to herself, pacing the length of her office. Her instincts screamed that whatever it was, it wouldn't bode well for the Newman family. Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that Claire's sudden alignment with Jordan wasn't the end of the story. It felt like the prelude to something much bigger, a storm that threatened to engulf them all. The threads of fate began to weave as the pieces began to move across the chessboard of Genoa City. Each character faced their own battles. Claire's departure with Jordan might seem like a surrender, but it was anything but. She was a strategist at heart, and her choice to leave was calculated, a way to buy time and keep her enemies close. For Sharon, the question of her savior remained unanswered, but the certainty of her survival hung in the air like a promise. Someone would come for her, not Nick, not this time, but someone whose courage and determination would defy all odds. And for Victoria, the stakes had never been higher. The cracks in her world were growing, threatening to shatter everything she had fought so hard to protect. Her suspicions about Cole and Claire weren't unfounded, and she knew that if she didn't act swiftly, her family's future could slip through her fingers. A future uncertain but full of potential. As Claire prepared to leave Genoa City, she stole one last glance at the town she had grown to both love and despise. I'll be back, she thought, determination flickering in her eyes. This isn't the end of my story. And in the heart of the city, Sharon clung to her last shred of hope, knowing that her fight for survival wasn't just for herself but for those she loved. Meanwhile, Victoria sat alone, staring out at the city skyline, the weight of her family's legacy pressing on her shoulders. The storm was coming, and she could feel it. But Victoria Newman was nothing if not a fighter. The stories of Genoa City were far from over, and each character stood at the precipice of change. Decisions would be made, alliances would be tested, and the lines between hero and villain would blur. But one thing was certain, Genoa City would never be the same. This narrative keeps the intrigue alive, adds depth to the characters, and sets up the potential for future developments. Let me know if there are specific directions you'd like to explore further. Smiling face with smiling eyes, the price of betrayal. Kyle's reckoning in Genoa City. Kyle Abbott had always walked a precarious line between charm and recklessness. He was a man who, despite his privileges and opportunities, often allowed his desires to dictate his actions. But this time, his betrayal of Claire threatened to unravel not only his personal life but also the fragile relationships that tethered him to Genoa City's web of power and intrigue. A secret exposed. Victoria Newman's sharp eyes had caught what no one else had. Kyle and Summer locked in a kiss, their stolen moment a spark of passion that betrayed Claire's trust and their carefully curated appearances. Victoria froze in place, her heart sinking as she processed the implications. Summer, her daughter, had unwittingly become entangled in Kyle's web of deceit. While Victoria's instinct was to confront Kyle immediately, she hesitated. Summer had been through enough heartbreak, and the last thing Victoria wanted was to see her daughter crushed by yet another man's irresponsibility. Instead, Victoria resolved to handle the matter with calculated precision. Kyle Abbott, she thought, her expression hardening, you owe me an explanation. And you'd better have a good one. The confrontation the next day, Victoria summoned Kyle to her office, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. Kyle arrived, his usual confidence masking an undercurrent of unease. Victoria's piercing gaze met his as she gestured for him to sit. I'll get straight to the point, Victoria began, her voice cold and controlled. I saw you with Summer yesterday. The kiss. The betrayal. Do you have any idea what you've done? Kyle's face drained of color, but he quickly composed himself. Victoria, I can explain. Explain? Victoria interrupted sharply, leaning forward. Explain why you're stringing along Claire while sneaking around with my daughter. Explain why you're willing to destroy 2 lives with your selfishness. I'm listening, Kyle. Go on. Kyle faltered, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. I care about Claire, I do, he stammered. But Summer and I, we have history. It's complicated. Complicated? Victoria scoffed. What's complicated is the mess you're creating. If you have any intention of salvaging your relationship with Claire, or my respect, for that matter, you'd better decide what you want and stick to it. Kyle looked away, his mind a whirlwind of guilt and indecision. Deep down, he knew Victoria was right. His actions were tearing apart the trust he had worked so hard to build, and the consequences were inevitable. Kyle's dilemma. Later that evening, Kyle sat alone in his apartment, reflecting on the choices that had led him to this moment. Claire was intelligent, ambitious, and fiercely loyal, a partner who challenged him in ways no one else had. But Summer was his past, a flame that refused to extinguish despite his attempts to move on. Could he truly let go of Summer? Did he even deserve Claire's forgiveness? The questions haunted him, and for the first time in a long while, Kyle felt the weight of his actions press heavily on his chest. Victor's warning. Meanwhile, in the Newman family's orbit, a storm of a different kind was brewing. Victor Newman, ever the patriarch and protector, had issued a dire warning. The shadows of Genoa City were growing darker, and danger was closer than anyone realized. Mark my words, Victor said, his voice grave during a family meeting. We've made enemies who won't hesitate to strike when we least expect it. Stay vigilant. Any one of us could be a target. His warning wasn't baseless. The recent kidnappings and threats against prominent figures in Genoa City had left everyone on edge. For Victoria, this only heightened her sense of urgency to safeguard her family, especially Summer, who now seemed vulnerable not just to external dangers but to the emotional fallout of Kyle's betrayal. A decision to be made as the tension mounted, Kyle realized he couldn't delay his decision any longer. He arranged to meet Claire, hoping to salvage what remained of their relationship. When they met, Claire's eyes held a mixture of warmth and suspicion. She had always been able to read Kyle like an open book, and she could tell something was amiss. "Kyle," she said, her voice steady but tinged with apprehension. "What's going on? You've been distant lately." Kyle hesitated, his heart pounding. "Claire, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." As he spoke, pouring out his guilt and confessing his kiss with Summer, Claire's expression hardened. She listened without interrupting, her sharp mind already processing the implications. When he finished, there was silence. Then, Claire spoke, her tone calm but cutting. "Kyle, I trusted you. I believed in what we had. But if you can't figure out what you want, or who you want, then maybe you don't deserve me." Her words struck him like a blow, and for the first time, Kyle felt the full gravity of what he had lost. The path forward. As Kyle grappled with the fallout of his actions, Victoria kept a watchful eye on Summer, determined to protect her daughter from further heartbreak. Claire, meanwhile, resolved to focus on herself, refusing to let Kyle's betrayal define her. And in the shadows, Victor's warning loomed ominously. The enemies of the Newman family were closing in, their motives unclear but their intentions unmistakably dangerous. Genoa City was a place of intrigue, betrayal, and redemption, a stage where every choice had consequences and every character had a role to play. For Kyle, Claire, Victoria, and Summer, the next act was about to begin, and no one could predict how it would end.